we knew if Dad was coming home that night, then someone was put on post at the front window, usually my brother that was just above me or the brother just above him. And when they would see him, then they would yell through the house, Dad's home, hide the kids. My dad's a big man. He's 6'8".
Whoa.
Probably 340 pounds. He's a very scary man when he's angry. And so my older sisters would take us younger kids, hide us in the basement closets, and tell us, don't come out until we come back to get you. We could still hear what was going on, right? We could hear him come in and rage and beat on them. Eventually things would quiet down. And when Dad's calmed down, then he's telling you how beautiful you are. Speaking in AUB speak of, you're the most precious thing in the world. I'm so thankful that God blessed my life with you.
Oh.
So it's like this Jekyll and Hyde. There was 4 of us girls born in a row, and I'm the oldest of those 4. So at 7, I had been babysitting a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 9-month-old baby. And I look back at that and I think, how in the world did I have 3 little kids underneath me at 7 that I was
Terrifying.
responsible for? Absolutely terrifying. How do I get her to stop crying? I've had this baby for 6 hours and she just is starving. Finally breaking down and giving her probably 3 or 4 ounces of warm honey water, so that she just had something in her little tummy to soothe her. I remember sitting up in that window and the moon shining and looking out just over that road and praying, like, please come home, Mom. This baby needs to be fed.
Mine is the only voice.
Wow.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey guys, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening on those podcast platforms and you'd like to see our faces, you can go to YouTube at Cults to Consciousness. We love it when you guys come over there to interact with the post. It's the best way to support us and our guests. They feel so loved and welcomed and seen and validated when you leave those words of encouragement. Our community is incredible for doing that for our guests. So today's guest, she is also from the AUB, also daughter of the current prophet, David Watson, and she reached out to us through our drop form. As a reminder, you can always do so through our About section. There's a link there that you can click on and reach out to us if you're interested in sharing your story. So we're going to get another perspective of what it was like growing up in the Apostolic United Brethren, which is also the same group that Cody Brown from the Sister Wives, the TV show, is from. So just more of a deeper dive. Thank you so much for joining us, Emily Lee.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so you are biological mother and father sisters with Melanie, who we have had on, and she has shared her story.
Yes.
And I'm really interested to hear your perspective as well. I know that within any group, especially within any family dynamic, things can be different and you can have different experiences. So I'm looking forward to hearing your side. I know that you did share your story on Without a Crystal Ball 2 years ago that has blown up pretty big, and we can get to that toward the end too, talking about what that was like for you. But first, let's talk about your upbringing. So your father is the current prophet. He was not when you were growing up. Can you give the viewers, if they're not familiar, just a little understanding of the AUB in general?
Yeah, definitely. So the AUB is a polygamist cult that is located in the Salt Lake City, Utah Valley. And they actually are the largest polygamist cult in the United States and probably in Mexico as well. So they span from, I think they have members in Canada, Montana, Idaho, Utah, Arizona, and down into Mexico. So there's about 10,000 members in the AUB. I think the Kingstons sit at about 7,500 members. And then the FLDS are about 4,500 members, if I remember correctly. I think total there's about 70,000, 60,000 polygamists in the United States and Mexico.
That's quite a few. And I would say that because they don't necessarily go around trying to convert people like mainstream Mormons do, it's just birth rates, right?
Right. Most of it is birth rates. Although there was an uptick of converts to the AUB, a lot of them came from the LDS Church, and that happened during COVID.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting. So I've heard a few different reasons, and maybe it's a combination of things that I believe the LDS Church highly encouraged their members to get the vaccine. And a lot of people are home with not a lot to do. So I think some of them probably deep dived their religion and went back to the original teachings of Joseph Smith, decided that's what they wanted to do. So they ended up going back into, or they not back into, but they ended up converting from the LDS Church into the AUB.
I cannot imagine looking into the history of the church and then doubling down. Because most people, when they look into the history of the mainstream Mormon church, they're like, wait, I was supposed to believe what? Joseph Smith said what? Brigham Young did what? And
Yeah,
so for someone to know all of that and go, yep, definitely the truth. I better start living polygamy, as Joseph Smith said, was an undying commandment to have celestial glory. That is banana sandwich to me.
I absolutely agree. I cannot imagine it. I would think deep diving into that, you would be more likely to leave
Yeah.
than you would be to say, oh, let's go to the original doctrine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not been the case. So a lot of the converts there are from just straight from the LDS Church.
Something that you mentioned that I find also interesting is the fact that they're extremely racist. That's not the interesting part, because that came from the founders. Again, the religion on the curse of Cain, according to Joseph Smith, and the Lamanites is a topic for another day. But I find it interesting that the AUB is super racist unless they are Hispanic. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, definitely I can. And I do agree it is very interesting that they don't believe that you should mix race at all. And then they have this whole colony in Mexico. So all of the polygamous churches came from the same group. They all started originally, they were the same people. And then they broke off into sections based on who thought had the authority of the Melchizedek priesthood or whatnot. So the AUB was founded by Roland Allred. And I believe Roland founded it back in like the 1940s or 50s. Well, Roland ended up taking some very young wives. I believe he had two. One was 14, one was 15. And I think he was probably 35 or 39. I'd have to double check those facts.
Just like Joseph Smith.
Right. So just like Joseph Smith. So there was a lot of men in the AUB that had younger wives. Some of them went to jail for several years because of the underage wives. And I say wives because that's the way that I was raised. I believe that they were children, right? They're young girls. So they had these young girls that they were treating as wives. And a lot of those men fled to Mexico. When some of them went to jail, I think some of the other men left in order to not go to jail. But because they had already been prosecuted for it, but they were continuing to do it, they needed to go somewhere safe, and Mexico was safe for them. So they have an extreme love for the people down there, and they have a very large colony of believers in Mexico. So they've built a church down there, and they make a lot of trips down to Mexico quite often still to this day. So the unfortunate thing that I see with that a lot is they human traffic. They would go down there, find women and marry them, and then they would bring them back here to the United States. And they didn't obviously go through the proper channels to get documentation for them. They would just bring them into the United States. I actually have a younger brother that has a wife and 5 or 6 children. And he got married about a year ago. So I say married, right? Very loosely, to a girl who looks about 15 or 16. They say she's 18. I would very, very, very highly question that, though. And he brought her from down there to Montana, and she is his second wife. So basically living in a foreign land with the inability to speak English. My brother and his wife speak English. They don't speak Spanish, although I have heard that the wife has learned to speak Spanish to the best of her ability, so they can communicate the basics, I believe, and maybe that will get better over time. But it breaks my heart. Like, I can just feel it so deep in my soul just thinking about this girl.
Yeah.
She's so far away from all of her family, her mom, her sisters, her grandma. You know, all of her family is down in Mexico, and she's all the way in Montana. She has no idea that she's in this cult.
All that I can think of is sex slave or handmaid. It doesn't
Yeah.
feel resonant at all. And she probably doesn't really fully understand, like you said, the context of what's going on and what they brought her over for.
Yeah.
And that's truly heartbreaking, and trafficking, like you said. I mean, that's the
Yes.
whole reason that Utah became what it was because they were trafficking women from Europe, from the Scandinavian area, which is why you get the white, blonde hair, blue eye look in Utah. And that's how they got so big, and that's how they stuck around, was just trafficking women, having them have multiple children as the however many number of wives they were. It's really unfortunate, and it makes sense as to why the AUB would continue doing that, because it worked in the past.
Yeah, it's worked for them in the past. And there are women that are in the church that have been in the church for 30, 40, 50 years. And they have been second wives, third wives, fourth wives to some of these men. And that's the only life that they've ever known.
It's also just really gross that they're racist unless it's convenient.
Right?
Racist unless they need somebody. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this all day. Let's talk about your specific family unit. Your mother was the second wife?
Correct. Yes. So my mom was the second wife. My mom was the first wife that my dad met. So my mom was 15 and my dad was 17. And both of my parents were raised in the LDS church. And then my dad converted to the AUB, I believe when he was about 12 or 14. His parents converted to the AUB from the LDS church. But that wasn't a known fact. So he met my mom. They fell in love. She was going to graduate high school, go into college, right? They were going to wait until she was older. And then he met his first wife, who he fell head over heels in love with. And to this day, she is still in his mind the love of his life. And so he ended up marrying her first, and then he married my mom shortly after. He had the first baby with the first wife, and then had Melanie, my mom's oldest, and had a second baby with the first wife. And then I believe either when my mom was pregnant with her second or shortly after my mom was pregnant with her second, then the first wife left. She decided this wasn't for her. She didn't want to share. She didn't want to be in this church anymore. And she didn't want her kids to be part of this. And so she ended up taking her two kids and leaving. And I don't think that ever put my mom into the first wife spot, but it definitely put her, I think, the most responsible for the family in every way. Financially, emotionally, physically. She was the mother of the family.
She went on to have 11 children, and you were about in the middle, right?
Right. I'm number 5 of the 11. I've got the 4 older and the 6 younger, and she just always loved on us really, really well. And I think her love is the reason that none of her children stayed in the AUB. I think because of how well she loved us, she taught us that color, status, race, none of that mattered. It didn't matter if you were the CEO of a company or you are the janitor of a company. People are people, and we're all equal, and we treat people with respect and love and kindness. And that's the way that all of her kids have been. So it's been really cool to watch. And I think that we got a lot of backlash within the family because we didn't conform to the ways of the AUB. We were the bad ones. We were the ones that were going to be the bad influence on the other kids in the family, whether it was our siblings or our cousins. And yet all of the siblings and the cousins would come to my mom if they needed love or guidance or, whatever. I think my mom has the best kids. She's done such a good job despite being in abuse her whole life.
I was going to say it's amazing that she was able to shine through all of that and maintain her own values that she obviously thought were incredibly important to pass down to her children, despite the environment that she was in and despite the teachings that would, imagine that, demonize her for wanting to have basic human decency.
I think it's absolutely bizarre. It really does seem so backwards that goes against what they teach, that we're not supposed to love and care for the people in our lives that way.
Yeah, and I think that leads into talking about your dad and how he treated his children, which was complete opposite. Again, amazing job to your mother for still providing that love to her children amongst such turmoil and abuse coming from her husband. So can you talk about the ways in which he treated you as his child?
Yeah. My dad was extremely abusive physically. And my mom and her kids were his whipping post family, right? So he would come home, every 3 nights or 4 nights, depending on how many wives he had. And he would get off work at 5. His business closed at 5. So he would usually get home around 5:30. And if my mom wasn't home, he would terrorize us, our house. He was extremely upset at the older kids. Why wasn't the house cleaned? Why wasn't everything put together? Why weren't the kids taken care of in the ways that they should have been? Why wasn't dinner ready? Whatever. In my opinion, from what I saw growing up, he abused my brothers a lot more physically than he did my sisters. So he would just walk by them and just smack them up the back of the head for no reason. It didn't matter if they had done anything or not. It just mattered how he felt in that moment. I remember sitting at our kitchen table one day having, lunch or dinner or something. Again, my mom wasn't home. My dad was there. And I remember him taking my brothers and hanging them by their belt buckles. So the loop on the belt buckle of their jeans, hanging them on the door hinge. He could lift them up enough and loop that over a door hinge, let them hang from those door hinges. I don't know why he did that. I don't know why he felt that was necessary or what that brought to him, but he knocked my brothers around so much. There were times that he punched them in the stomach, and then when they would fall to the ground and cry, he would tell them to get over themselves, to man up, to, pull yourself together, get back on your feet. And he did beat us girls also. So I definitely remember multiple times being spanked with, in a past interview, I called it a 4x4. Apparently it was a 2x4 piece of wood that he would whip us with. Get your asses in here to the living room and line up, oldest to youngest, and bend over, and then he'd beat them one at a time. And I have physical scars still to this day from some of the times that he beat me. On one occasion that he beat me with the 2x4, he left a sliver of that wood in my leg, and my older sister couldn't get it out. And so she snuggled me and, took care of me and tried to comfort me as much as she could until my mom got home and my mom could take care of it. And so that is one of the scars that I do have on my legs is from that specifically. And then there were a lot of days where the older kids had a system, and we knew if dad was coming home that night then someone was put on post at the front window. So usually my brother that was just above me, or the brother just above him, they would sit at that front window and watch for him. And when they would see him come around the corner, then they would yell through the house, Dad's home, hide the kids. And so my older sisters would take us younger kids and they would hide us in the basement closets. So in their bedroom closets, they would take us and hide us and tell us, don't come out until we come back to get you. And of course, we're in the basement, the living room was just above those rooms. So we could still hear what was going on, right? We could hear him come in and rage and rampage and beat on them. And then eventually things would quiet down and one of them would come and get us. But they definitely tried to protect us in ways that they never should have had to think about. It's terrible to see the aftermath of what that instilled in us kids and how that moved forward into our lives.
Yeah. What were some of the ways that you noticed growing up that transpired into someone's day-to-day life?
I watched my brothers struggle emotionally a lot. I really, really worried about them and suicide. I know that there's been really high rates of suicide in younger men in the AUB. All of my mom's kids have had a lot of anger issues. And I think that that's definitely something that we've each had to work through. So not necessarily anger towards others, right? Not wanting to take that anger out on others, but just not having the ability to emotionally regulate.
Yeah.
So there would be a lot of broken doors and holes in bedroom walls. And I watched my brothers punch a lot of holes in the walls and kick doors and things like that. And a lot of times it had to do with my dad, just in their frustration or anger at my dad. My dad's a big man. He's 6'8",
Whoa.
probably 340 pounds. He's a very big man. He's a very scary man when he's angry. So even just him puffing his chest and towering over you is absolutely terrifying. I don't know why he took it to the extremes that he did, but he did. And as an adult, I think that really breaks down your self-esteem as a child when you're being beaten like that. And an hour later, when dad's calmed down, then he's telling you how beautiful you are and you're the most precious thing to him.
Oh.
So it's like this Jekyll and Hyde, right? There's two sides to this man where he's just an absolute monster. And then there's this other side where he's speaking in AUB speak of, you're the most precious thing in the world. And I'm so thankful that God blessed my life with you. And it's confusing.
Yeah.
And it also leads to not so great people in your life when you come out of the AUB. So until you have worked through that abuse and you have healed from that abuse, which I don't know that you'll ever fully heal from, but until you do that, you will end up meeting people outside of the AUB that come into your life that behave in similar ways.
Yeah.
So it's a process to get through.
Well, it's no wonder you and all of your siblings were shocked when he became the prophet, having dealt with him on such a personal level, an abusive level.
Yeah.
Was this something that was rampant throughout the AUB? Did most fathers do this to their children? I'm imagining how your father became the prophet, and now people are looking to him of how did you raise your children? And it's scary to me to think that could be a way that other people justify abusing their children further.
From what I know, not everyone in the AUB is an abuser.
Yeah.
In those ways, right? I do believe that every single family in the AUB has been touched by physical abuse. And it tends to run with wives that are converts to the AUB. So, for example, my dad has a wife that was born and raised in the AUB. So her children were like royalty in our family. They were treated better than any of the other kids were. And as far as I know, my dad didn't beat any of her kids. I do remember some things happening with some of those brothers that were extremely inappropriate, but I don't think that that was a consistent thing that they ever had to deal with. And I think that a lot of abusers do this anyways. In their lives, they have the people that just think they are the most amazing person you'll ever meet. And they can't imagine, they cannot fathom that this person could ever do anything that extreme. And then they have the other side where they have the family members that they did abuse, whether it was physical abuse or sexual abuse. And so that family, that wife, those kids get to see the really dark, evil side of that man. And so if it ever does come out that there's been abuse, the man still has support and love and
Yeah.
the people that just know him to be completely different.
And those are the ones who usually get away with it because
Yeah.
by design, and this is something that narcissists do as well, by design, they are charming and charismatic and everyone loves them. And oh, it's the community guy. He's always around. He loves the children. They love him. But then behind closed doors, it's a different story. And it's on purpose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They definitely do. So if a wife comes out and says, my husband is so extremely abusive in this way, then he's got people around him that think,
You're lying.
there's no way. You're lying. He would never do that. You're absolutely crazy. And so it is definitely by design. They are extremely manipulative and they are extremely charming. They're salesmen. They can sell their charm. So they manipulate and sell this story of how great they are. And then behind closed doors, they are evil and toxic and hateful and terrible.
With your mom being the person that she is or was with you in the house as a young child, did she ever try to stand up to your dad for the ways he would treat you?
Absolutely. Yeah, she absolutely did. Back then, I don't think that it was so uncommon for kids to be beat. All of my life, all of my memories, I know there was so many times where I knew that my mom was upset at my dad. I never saw my parents fight. I was probably 15 before I ever saw my parents fight, raise their voices at each other, any of that, right? But you can feel the energy shift. So you know there's an issue, you know there's problems. So I definitely do remember that.
Yeah.
And I remember her saying, I don't understand why you come home and you see everything that isn't done. Why don't you come home and see the things that are done? Why don't you come home and see what the kids have handled that day, right? We're kids, we're raising each other. And yet they continue to have more kids based on their teaching. And they can't be there to parent us.
Yeah.
And of course, when dad comes home at 5:00, well, he's worked all day and he pays the mortgage. So he needs to come home and put his feet up. He's not necessarily coming home to care for or attend to us children. That's still our responsibility. We still need to care for each other. We still need to make sure that dinner gets made because mom's at work. Mom has to work hard. She has to work several jobs. What else can she do when she needs these basic necessities for her children? So I don't think that she fully saw the brunt of it. The worst memories that I have of him, she was at work. She wasn't home for any of that. So she did stand up to him when she knew. And I remember, like I said, her saying, why don't you see the things that are done? So there were definitely times where, again, someone was at the window watching for dad. And we had a stack of books on the couch. And so when the call through the house came home, dad's home, we would all run to that couch and pile on it together. And Melanie would grab a storybook and, she's got her arms around us and we're all just crouched and she's reading stories to us. And so basically, like, if you come in and you see that she's caring for the children, you can't beat them if the house isn't cleaned. So it was a roller coaster. And again, the older kids did a lot to try to protect the younger kids, but that didn't always happen.
And it's not their job, and it's not their job to be the parent. And when you have this parentification of all these young children, it creates chaos because you're a child yourself. You don't know what you're doing half the time. I mean, I'm an adult and I still don't know what I'm doing half the time raising a child. And you had told me about a situation when you were only 7 years old caring for these young siblings. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I remember at 7, at about 9 p.m. at night, I had been babysitting the 3 younger sisters. There was 4 of us girls born in a row, and I'm the oldest of those 4. So at 7, I had a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 9-month-old baby. And I look back at that and I think, how in the world did I have 3 little kids underneath me at 7 that I was
Terrifying.
responsible? Absolutely terrifying. We didn't have cell phones back then. All of us nursed, we were all breastfed. We did have bottles in the house, and I think that that was more for probably the kids when they were toddlers. So we did have bottles in the house, but I do remember at 7 knowing that you're not supposed to give a baby honey because it can be really dangerous for them to have honey. Battling my internal, how do I get her to stop crying? I've had this baby for 6 hours, 7 hours, and she just is starving and she wants my mom. And finally breaking down and giving her probably 3 or 4 ounces of warm honey water so that she just had something in her little tummy to soothe her. And then I remember climbing up on the kitchen sink because the way that our kitchen window sat, I could see out over the yard and kind of the carport where my mom would park. So I could see the main road where my mom would come home. And then also I could see the car part where she would park if, she had gone home. And so I remember sitting up in that window and the moon shining and looking out just over that road and praying, please come home, Mom. I just need you to come home, right? I'm 7. I need my mom. But more than that, this baby needs to be fed. And she couldn't take us all the time with her, but she did when she could. I went with her a lot and I would babysit the younger kids. So she would work and I would play in a back room and watch them until they needed to be nursed or she could take a break. But just that one specific memory of having those younger girls. And I know that it happened more than that, right? That wasn't the only time, but I just can very, very clearly feel and remember looking out that window, just begging God to bring her home.
Yeah.
So that she could take care of us.
Oh, that's so much for a child to deal with. And even having the awareness at 7, you knew what that baby needed and you knew that you couldn't provide it. And it's so dangerous leaving children with children. I mean, honey and water, 2 of the things that you're not supposed to get. I mean, at 9 months, she could probably have water, but that's terrifying. Thinking about your mother in this scenario, her knowing that she had to be at work and she had to leave her babies home without proper care, she must have been a wreck too.
I'm sure she was. She would come straight in the door and it was like she couldn't get her shirt undone fast enough, right? And I'm sure she's breastfeeding, so she's engorged. She's in pain herself. She needs her baby, right? She can't get home fast enough to get to her kids. And so I remember her just walking through the door and dropping things and straight to wherever, her bed, her chair, wherever she was going to sit, and just getting her shirt undone, her, nursing bra undone as quickly as she could, and then just handing her the baby and that baby just latching on right away. And it was in that moment where there was just so much relief, just knowing she's here, everything will be okay. And then knowing that the baby's okay, that, her belly's got food in it, she's gonna be okay. There's so many things like that that are just, why? Why do they need to have all of these children that they can't afford to take care of, and they can't afford to time or money? There's not enough in the bank account of time or money to raise these children. So I don't understand what the mentality is of having these big, huge, large families, how that helps these men in any way.
The doctrine ultimately punishes the children,
Yeah.
the ones who need to be taken care of the most. And I'm assuming that buying formula was just off the table
Yeah.
with your situation. If your mom's working 3 jobs, 11 children, how did you go about eating? Did you have enough food at home?
Not usually. We usually didn't have enough food at home. My mom did a really good job for what the situation was, but we ate a lot of potatoes. We lived on potatoes. We ate them raw. We boiled them. We did every kind of potato recipe that you can possibly think of. I do remember having ramen noodles a few times when I was a kid, but then I also remember thinking that my friends that had ramen noodles in their cabinets consistently, that they must have been really wealthy, right? Like they had a lot more money than we
Wow.
did.
The people who had ramen noodles were wealthy.
Yeah, the ones that had ramen noodles consistently. Back in that time, you could get artichokes for 10 cents. So you could get 10 artichokes for $1. So I do remember eating a lot of artichokes, although I don't think artichokes are that filling.
Yeah, I was like, the amount of work it takes to eat an artichoke, and at the end, you're still hungry.
Yeah, you're still hungry. So she always kept popcorn seeds in the house and potatoes in the house. And so there were times where I remember eating popcorn and watermelon for dinner, sometimes because that was all we had, and sometimes because we fell in love with that. We did get a lot of the expired bakery food. So we would get, the several day old loaves of bread. And we just thought that we had won the lottery if they brought home a box of donuts that had been expired for 2 or 3 days. I listened to Melanie's interview, and so I have several memories when I was younger of going through some food line. I remember getting gallons of milk and getting this food. I remember putting it on the conveyor belt, and I remember that we didn't have to pay for it. And I couldn't ever remember or have anyone confirm to me where that was. And then in Melanie's interview, she talked about the fact that there was a Catholic church that was behind my grandparents' house, and they apparently had a food program. So I do remember going there a few times when we were kids and getting food from church. And so probably between the ages of 5 and 10, 12, I think that we relied on that as often as possible.
Yeah.
We had good meals on the nights my dad came home, and we had good meals on holidays. And I don't know, how did my mom do that? How did she pull that off? What extra chores or things did she do right before those events that gave her the ability to prepare those meals?
Mhm. I imagine with very little nutrition or not eating much at all and getting physically abused, you were probably just emaciated. Do you remember feeling lightheaded as a child or unable to run and jump and do all the things kids do?
Yeah, a lot. And I remember thinking that there was something wrong with me. I remember my mom thinking that there was something wrong with me. I think that there were times where all of us kids went through different illnesses. And as an adult, I can look back and say, how much was that from a nutritional deficiency?
Mhm.
And how much of that could have been different illnesses at the time?
So I think that there was a lot of health issues. I definitely remember having really thin spots on our bodies that probably shouldn't have been as thin as they were, and bruising really easily. And sometimes when kids don't have enough nutrition, they'll have the opposite where they gain weight. And I know that seems so counterintuitive, but when the body goes into that starvation mode, it will hang on to anything that it gets. And so sometimes you have obesity in kids. It's kind of hard sometimes, I think, to tell whether or not they're being fed consistently.
Yeah. Wow, there's just so much going on here where the children are obviously not taken care of, and the opposite, the abuse. And something that I know we wanted to talk about was how sexual abuse was swept under the rug, or people would turn an eye to it, or nothing would be done to hold the perpetrator accountable. So, however you want to speak about that.
Yeah, there is a really high rate of sexual abuse in the AUB. And when those situations would happen, when they would come out, it was almost always swept under the rug. They did not get the authorities involved because the AUB men believe that they are the authority. They are the authority over the government in whatever state or city they live in. And so they have basically like their own court system. You take things before the council, and so the council men will discipline the men that are underneath them. And the prophet has the ultimate say. He's got the ultimate power over all of the people in the church. But for the most part, things were really swept under the rug. There wasn't any accountability, any real accountability in these situations. And I had a grandfather who was LDS, and he sexually abused me and several of my sisters, my mom, some of her sisters, some of my cousins. So that ran really rampant, and there wasn't accountability there in the beginning. And finally, it had all come out. There was a lot of victim blaming. My grandma was, you girls were in a nightgown and you sat on his lap, and she victim blamed us severely. It was really, really bad. And just the emotional torture that my mom went through in having to deal with that. I think I had an aunt and a couple of little nieces or, cousins that they were coming into town and they were going to stay at my grandparents' house. And Melanie brought it up that it was not okay for those girls to stay there. And they basically said, mind your business, right? These are our kids, these are our parents, and we will do what we want. Well, Melanie said, absolutely not. And she ended up reporting the abuse. The abuse had been reported through the church, so the bishop knew, and the appropriate authorities in the LDS church, and obviously my dad knew as well. But it took Melanie going in and filing that report, and then the police got involved. And there used to be a statute of limitations on sexual abuse and on child abuse in the state of Utah. The last time I checked, there wasn't a statute of limitations anymore. Victims have such a hard time speaking out about it. When you're a child and you're being abused consistently, it's the last thing that you want to go and tell your parents about. There's so much shame and guilt and all kinds of feelings that surround that. So that situation, I think, really affected me for most all of my life. And I believe that I thought for a long time that that was most of what I needed to unpack from my childhood was that sexual abuse. So we did end up going through the court system. There was one other, younger sister who he could be prosecuted for, and then a little bit for me. And so at 14, going into court and having to testify about that was incredibly traumatizing, and especially with the way that my grandma, blamed us as, the victims. And how could we do this to him when no one was actually hurt?
No.
And now here he is, an 80-year-old man who's having to be accountable for these crimes. And it was so unfair because he had to go to jail. And how dare we put our 80-year-old grandfather in jail? It caused a lot of upset and a lot of problems in the family that ultimately ended a lot of relationships because people were so ignorant to the harm, the effects. Yes, we were hurt. We were extremely hurt. These were things that changed the course of our lives and the way that we parented, and so many things that don't ever just go away.
Yeah.
You're not just okay because you can't physically see scars and wounds when you're dealing with that type of abuse.
Absolutely awful. And to layer on guilting a child and to layer on the blame to a child from this man was a grown-ass man who knew better, and
Yep,
it was not one person, not that that would make it any different, but he's clearly a perpetrator and a predator to multiple children, and
yep.
that is shocking. I wonder if she just couldn't bear to admit that she had married a pedophile, because how in the world can you just blame these children? I'm shocked by that.
Yeah. And not only that, I think that she helped him. And whatever she got out of that, I don't know. Whether it took that sexual chore or whatever, it was in their relationship, if it took that off of her plate, I don't know. I do know there were times where grandpa's in the bath. You need to go in and help wash grandpa's back.
What?
And how, as a mother, do you send your small child or your small grandchild into the bathroom
Yeah.
to help your husband take a bath? Absolutely bizarre. So I guess she would probably be qualified as, a perpetrator or a predator herself. And that was really hard. She took care of us kids a lot when we were younger. She would come and pick us up and take us and feed us. And, she would take care of us. So again, it's really confusing when you have someone that you love so much and that you believe loves you so much, and then they essentially turn their back on you and they make it out to be your fault, these horrible things that have been done to you.
Yeah.
That's been a real process to emotionally work through. But aside from that, there are really high rates of sexual abuse in the AUB, and amongst, siblings, the parents are gone a lot. The kids are left home alone together. And so there were times where there was actual real, not just like normal curiosity in younger kids, like older boys that were sexually abusing younger children. My dad and one of his wives, I want to say they were so naive to it, but I don't think that they were naive to it. I think that they were embarrassed and they really wanted it to go away. They didn't want it to be known in the family. And that had gone through the court system, and that boy was not allowed. He's actually one of my younger brothers, a half brother. He was not supposed to be allowed to be around children. So he would come to events and he was supposed to be locked by his mom's side. And they didn't do that. They let him run off and play. So then we were all on high alert if we were at a family event and our kids were there. We had to watch them incredibly closely. And to the point where it got to be a lot of us wouldn't come to things if he was going to be there. And then when we were all old enough and we finally really started to put our foot down with our dad, then it was okay. He can't come. He can't come. He can't come. That's it. You just don't do it. You don't bring him around 30 or 40 little kids, regardless of whether you think he's been rehabilitated or not, he doesn't get to be part of these things. It was more than just him, but it doesn't seem to be something that's on their radar as harmful or dangerous, or not that I would say that they encourage it, although it feels like they do when they don't follow the rules that have been given to them.
Well, this is a symptom of a greater problem, which is lack of education, lack of sex education,
Absolutely.
lack of understanding your body, consent, boundaries. And on top of that, layering the heavy doctrine of, I'm sure you had the same thing like we did in mainstream Mormonism, which is your purity is everything. We've had, was it Himbel that said it is better to die defending your virtue than live having lost it? So he's saying if someone is trying to rape you and you don't die in a struggle, it's your fault and you've lost your virtue and you're basically worthless. And having that type of doctrine on top of abstinence only purity culture and in a very extreme environment with children who are unattended, it's just a recipe for disaster, especially with these predators who are roaming free, no real accountability, not answering to the law, also being able to do whatever they want around their children, other people's children. So, is that something that you also felt heavy on you after you dealt with this with your grandfather? Is this doctrine of purity?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think anybody that has experienced that type of abuse understands the feelings of worthlessness, accountability that you take as the victim. Like you're saying, we were taught these scriptures and these things that give the perpetrator the power when we're young and we're helpless and we're being abused in these ways. But then we're told that our virtue is everything, and we're told that we should die fighting.
Yeah.
And what happens if you're the type of person that, in the fight, flight, freeze? What happens if your body freezes
Exactly.
and there's nothing that you can do? Then you're the bad one. You're the one that, takes on that shame and that guilt. And how do these men think that they have the authority to govern over these other men that are underneath them? Why aren't they getting the police involved?
Yeah.
Why aren't they letting the state do their job and handle these situations? And I know that there was a lot that happened in the LDS church, and there's a lot that went on in the AUB. I think it's really rampant in all of the polygamous cults. It has something to do with those men believing that they are the ultimate say over anyone that's underneath them.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking when you understand the context of just how prevalent it is in these high control groups and how these children are helpless. They can't run, they can't get out, they are stuck in this situation. And that's why we call attention to this, not to bring anybody down or to just focus on the negative, as some people say, but to really call attention to what's going on and to open people's eyes to help them understand what these children are dealing with, and also just to provide another perspective. So if you do know someone who's come out of a high control group, not to say every single person has been sexually abused, but you can have a better understanding of their mentality and where they came from and what they dealt with.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I wondered if this had anything to do with you choosing to get married so young, or if that was pushed on you to get married so young, or what the mentality around that was. There was so much to discuss with Emily. We ended up going on for quite a while, and we decided to split this up into 2 parts. I promise you the second part is coming soon. Make sure to stay tuned. Hit that bell so you don't miss it when it drops. We are going to be discussing how she was married at a young age and why her life trying to navigate being a young mother, ending up having 5 children in a marriage that was less than ideal, and how she's been able to slowly unwind the programming and the doctrine from from the AUB. And so you're not going to want to miss it. Stay tuned. If you want to keep in touch with her or find her on social, we will put her handles below and in the description. If you want to support the channel, the best way, as always, is to interact with the post in any way. Liking, sharing, commenting, leaving those words of encouragement means so much to us and our guests. You'll see in the second episode, she has been watching the channel for basically since its inception, and she said some things that made me almost cry. So such a special guest with us today. Full circle moment of coming on and being brave enough to share her story with the world. If you want to support further, we do have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. You can find our merch at cults2consciousness.com. If you want to hang out with us in Mexico at the end of October, we are going to be doing that. So you can find all of those links in the description. If you like this video, make sure to check out our other interviews. We did one with her sister, Melanie. We have another interview, not sure when it's releasing before or after this, with someone else, Janae, who is also in the AUB. So you're not going to want to miss that. I'll link 2 of those down here below. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.